Welcome back to the Road to Recovery podcast. I'm your host, Tommy, with my amazing co-host and actor, Ryan, and that's not an insult. Today we've got a great guest on. We've got Bart Kay on. Bart's a former senior lecturer in clinical physiology, cardiovascular and respiratory, and in exercise physiology, nutrition, research methods and statistics as well. He's done a lot of peer-reviewed studies and obviously worked with the New Zealand All Blacks as well. So thanks for coming on, Bart. It's really great to have you on.
My pleasure, Tommy. Thanks for having me.
So, Ryan, I'll let you jump right into it.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. So I'm fascinated by you know a lot of you've been doing a lot of I want to say research, but looking into like stem cells, and I know you're a fan of carnivore diet and stuff like that. Both things madly fascinate me, and I'm the least qualified person to talk about either of them by any stretch of the word. But I find it extremely fascinating. So I want to know kind of just a little bit about your background and what kind of drew you to these areas of science and nutrition and stuff like that.
Right. Well, Ryan, I kind of started out doing the usual thing. I left school. I went right through school. I did 7th form, which is like a year 13. So I was 17 years of age or so when I left school. I didn't know what I wanted out of life. I drifted around. I did laboring jobs. I worked on a driveway. I worked in, sawmills and did physical labor and those kind of things. And then 5 minutes later, after I turned 17, I woke up and I was 27 and I had nothing, and my body was starting to fall to bits because of all the physical labor and whatever else. And I kind of figured this wasn't going to be the way. I'd always had a head on my shoulders. I'd always had some intelligence, but I'd spent my whole life rebelling against absolutely anyone that wanted to impose any kind of structure upon me. As it turned out, it wasn't diagnosed until only literally a few years ago, actually, and I'm nearly 50, so that's a dead giveaway, but there you go. It turns out I have a form of autism known as pathological demand avoidance syndrome. So basically, anytime anybody tells me you must do something this way or you must do that or the other thing, we're going to have a problem. sort of situation. But anyway, I started doing my first undergraduate degree, which was a sport and exercise science-based degree. And I did that out of a polytech here in New Zealand. And I started that when I was 27. So I graduated with my first degree when I was 30. And then I went on from there, and I just basically stayed in academia between then and 2018 when I finally decided to retire from that game. So I've ended up through that process with 3 advanced research degrees, 2 in the area of exercise physiology and 1 in the area of cardiovascular pathophysiology. I was a senior lecturer, as Tommy said. I taught in universities here in New Zealand and also in Australia, and also up in the UK for a while as well. Did some work with the All Blacks, as Tommy spoke about. I did some work with a couple of military organisations down here in Australasia as well. And I also did a bit with the NRL Rugby League referees while I was at it. So that's kind of the background there. Did a bunch of different research projects on a bunch of different things. Published a number of articles. I came across the carnivore way of eating roughly 4.5 years ago, when I saw Jordan Peterson and Michaela Peterson's channel, and that led me to Sean Baker's channel, and I looked up Sean Baker and checked into that and etc. And then I just went out from there. Prior to that, I was actually doing the ketogenic way of living for, I was doing that for 20 years. So I was doing that well before it was trendy and cool to do. I was doing it because it was the exact opposite of what my lecturers told me was good for me. As it turned out, it was actually exactly what is good, to live basically a ketogenic lifestyle. And going full carnivore is really just an evolution on that, and it finishes off that circuit and gets the human physiology back to where it should be. We are evolved as a species to fulfill a certain ecological niche. This idea that we should have balance in our diet and that we should eat widely from both the plants and the foods side of things is actually completely false. It's without any evidence of any kind in the scientific literature. It's an idea that's being taught. It's a hypothesis that's being taught. It's not an established fact. All the evidence seems to point very, very clearly to what the correct ancestral diet for human beings is. And as it turns out, it's a diet consisting of roughly 95 to 100% meat and fat. So there you go. That's the full where we're up to.
Interesting. Because I've been doing, so it's not, I'm OCD. Tommy,
Okay.
I'm sure you have OCD tendency. I don't want to just diagnose you there.
So
But me, as you may or may not know, I'm sure you know if you know Tommy, me and him both suffered from eating disorders for quite a lengthy amount of time. And we both have complications in some shape or fashion because of those eating disorders. I have a suspected autoimmune small fiber neuropathy, and he has some nerve damage as well and some other things with tendinitis and stuff like that. So it's kind of always been, health is something I have always been passionate about, and nutrition prior to developing anorexia. And then it just turned into this self-defeating weapon. And when, of course, you're going through recovery, you're talking to eating disorder therapists and nutritionists, and they do pack on this whole balanced approach to healing yourself and your mind. And it's something that I don't want to push any certain ideology on anybody else as well as you don't, I'm sure. But I do agree with you. And the more and more time that I've looked at nutrition and ancestral ways of eating and human physiology, the more I've gravitated towards more of that kind of carnivore-esque thought process around how humans were meant to live and eat food. It's just super tricky because it's like, how do you go about that when you're dealing with people that have these other mental problems? And I have to admit, when I switched to more of a ketogenic way of eating that I have been the last 6 months or so, I've been on something called the Walls Protocol, which was developed by Dr. Terry Walls, who has MS and other autoimmune conditions. I have noticed a better mindset and less anxiety, less depression, less really OCD behavior that I used to really get caught up in. So I've noticed that food does impact these things. It's much more than just going to therapy and talking about it. It's a very overall picture in my view.
Absolutely.
So
it's really correlated. The food and obviously mental health really goes hand in hand. Just like you talked about, I think it's really, really important that you heal your relationship with food when you've got an eating disorder. But there becomes a time, especially for me, I find that I do a lot better when I reduce my carbohydrate intake, because that's when I seem to get a lot of issues. The migraines start to kick in, the digestive issues start to kick in. Recently, I probably must admit I've been round about 300-400 grams of carbs a day, which is kind of correlated to the injuries that I've suffered with. Could be. I think that really goes hand in hand. But when I was a footballer, I was really on like a meat-based diet. I suppose you could probably call it a ketogenic diet back then. And that's what I really seem to do best in. So that's my kind of approach. What I probably want to get back there eventually, but it's difficult for me when I feel I've still got this kind of ethical push as well.
Yeah, so maybe Bart, while you're here, you can just elaborate for our viewers a little bit on kind of what you've looked into as far as ancestral ways of eating and how our physiology, in theory, you think works best.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, I want to first just kind of really support what both of you have said in terms of the mental health food relationships there. I want to caveat what I've got to say next with I am not a psychiatrist. I wouldn't want to be. I only actually know one psychiatrist, and her and I don't get on. Tommy knows who I'm talking about. That's
social psychologist.
Oh my God, that's a story for another day, isn't it, Tom? We'll deal with her another day.
We may call her a relatable friend.
Yeah, our relatable friend. Yes, her. Yeah, I'm talking about her from Chola. Yeah. Anyway, the thing with mental health is that mental health is an aspect of your overall physiological health. A lot of people view mental health as this great ethereal thing, this thing that's kind of comes from our brain, and so therefore we don't really understand it very well, etc. And it's all a bit airy-fairy, for want of a better term. I want to squash that right here and now and say we actually do understand mental health problems really rather well, actually. 90-something% of all mental health issues are a direct causal artifact of inflammation of the tissues in the brain. The single easiest way for a person to cause inflammation to occur in their brain is to consume a diet which causes inflammation in their gut. There are more nerve endings in the enteric cells, the cells that line your guts, than in the rest of your entire peripheral nervous system throughout the rest of your entire body. We often refer to your gut as your second brain for that reason. And a diet which is rich in indigestible fibers, a diet which is rich in plant-based toxins, a diet which is not sufficient for you nutritionally, a diet which is not in line with your ancestral makeup, your physiological makeup, your organ systems, the genetic gift that you have on the basis of the way that we have made our way on this planet for 350,000 years. That's almost a dead cert to, if not cause, to absolutely exacerbate any situation you might have with a mental health issue. Now, if you've already got a tendency towards an eating disorder, or what they refer to actually as an eating disorder, and then you kind of play around with, well, let's eat this rabbit diet, shall we say, that will inflame you still further, and that will actually lead you down a rabbit hole of self-perpetuating inflammation in your gut, which leads straight back to your brain. So yeah, it's very, very important in terms of your mental health to get your diet right. And that's why this question, go on, Tommy.
I think that's very good what you're actually saying there, because I've followed Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, and she basically follows a similar approach. She's healed a lot of people with even autism, eating disorders, a lot of mental health issues. She sees great results. So I think that's really important to touch upon that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And I guess the answer to the question really around why is it that I so passionately believe that we should be eating the flesh and fat of animals and not plants, there are a number of reasons. A lot of them are kind of reductionist. A lot of them are like, take something out of its context, look at it stand alone, and make conclusions on that basis. Those are kind of what we call weak evidence. Mm-hmm. So, for example, here's some really weak evidence that people often produce that says, oh, here's why human beings are herbivores, they say. They say, look at our teeth. Mm-hmm. Okay, now that's complete reductionism, because our teeth are just one of many systems of our body. They are one part of our physiology. What we need to understand about our organ systems, all of them, is that they exist in the form they exist because they are a work in progress. They are selective pressures that decide which genes are passed on and which genes fail, basically. And so over geological timescales, over hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years, in fact, an animal will change from one form to another. The only thing that will cause an animal to change form, notably, is a negative selection pressure, something that knocks a gene out, that says that gene is not useful, it needs to go. And the fact that we have a brain, the ability to articulate language and to speak and to communicate with each other and to work together, the fact that we have opposable thumbs and can make tools means that there is no pressure on evolution that would make our teeth change notably. If we used to eat largely fruit, which is what our teeth look like, and we did, we're talking probably 3.5–4 million years ago, actually, boys, is about when pre-human beings were eating largely fruit. We developed a large brain because we started eating meat, and we had opposable thumbs. We could make tools. We could do all that kind of stuff. And we've just continued to develop our brains, our language, our communication skills, our society, our ability to make tools and make better tools, etc., etc. That obfuscates the need for our teeth to change. So they haven't changed particularly. In actual fact, our teeth have mostly changed in the last 10,000 years since we started the agrarian society, since we started growing wheat, basically. And what's happened to our teeth and our mouths and our jaws in that time is they've basically dissolved. It's been a bad thing on every front. When we started eating meat, obviously we had much bigger jaw musculature, much bigger jaws, much bigger mouths, much bigger teeth, etc., etc. So that's been a bad thing. So then we look at, okay, well, let's look at our stomachs. Are they basic or are they acidic? If they're basic, that tells us we're herbivorous. If they're acidic, that tells us we're carnivorous. Okay? Our stomachs are more acidic than dogs are.
So now, on the level of a cat, I believe.
Yeah, about exactly that. About on the level as Felis domestica, or the cat, if you like. And cats are obligate hypercarnivores. Okay, so that tells, okay, while we might have herbivorous teeth, because there's no reason not to, our stomach acid tells us, oh, well, perhaps we should be eating meat. And the fact that our stomachs are so acidic, that tells us that actually a lot of our meat has come from carrion. It's come from scavenging. It's you know, we did some hunting, absolutely, but we also did a great deal of cleaning up after others and chasing lions off their kill, and even if we found some half rotten meat somewhere, we'd yum that down too, as a species. So that's in there. Then we look at our digestive systems, and we look at the length of our long and our short, our large and our small bowel, if you like. And our small bowel is long and our large bowel is short, which tells us carnivore and not herbivore. So stomach and bowel, both that way. We then look at, do we have a cecum? Our herbivorous forebears did some hindgut fermentation to gain some nutrition from the fermentation of one or two of the fibers and things that were being eaten. Example would be our common ancestor with gorillas. Gorillas still have a large cecum. They do a lot of hindgut fermentation. They get most of their nutrition that way, which, by the way, hindgut fermentation of fibers provides the gorilla with short-chain fatty acids, which, by the way, are almost 100% saturated. So a gorilla's diet is actually almost 100% saturated fat. Interesting for people to understand. Also, a gorilla will happily eat meat if it can.
I believe monkeys do as well. The vegans
monkeys
always bring this up. They always say that monkeys are vegan, but you actually find out they eat the brains of their babies and such likes.
You bet. And chimpanzees hunt in packs and kill monkeys and eat them. Absolutely. And if you put meat in front of a cow, the cow will eat it gleefully.
I mean, we know pigs will eat pretty much everything.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
It definitely goes across.
Anyway, so that's a bunch. I'll just finish off that one, then jump in after that, Ryan. All of those are kind of reductionist things, the different organ systems I've been talking about, etc. We don't have a cecum. Well, we do. It's about that big. It's called your appendix. It's a vestigial organ. It's just about gone. It's been got rid of because we don't need it, because we've spent 350,000 years eating fat and meat. How do I know that? Because there's now a thing available which is called nitrogen 15 isotope testing. What they've done is they have taken collagen out of the bones of skeletal remains of human beings that have been discovered, which range across 350,000 years of human history. And the exact amount of meat versus plant material that an individual has eaten throughout their life is absolutely reflected in the nitrogen compounds, the isotopes of nitrogen found in the collagen in that person's bones or hair or inside their teeth, whatever. And there's also a corroborative test called a carbon isotope test, which can tell us pretty much exactly what the source of the protein was even. Anyway, this is one that's not reductionist. This one is absolutely slam dunk. You can look at teeth, you can look at stomachs, you can look at digestive systems, you can look at cecums, you can look at anything you like and say, this suggests this, that suggests the other thing. But nitrogen isotope testing tells us what human beings definitely ate. No question. Not maybe, not guesswork, not a reductionist thing. It's an absolute slam dunk. It's hard science.
Yeah.
And the nitrogen testing tells us that human beings throughout the last 350,000 years have eaten almost nothing but the flesh of ruminant animals, largely, and the associated fat that comes along with that. Plants were used in very, very small amounts for medicinal purpose, specific plants at specific times. Plants are not food for human beings. Slam dunk. That's why I'm so passionate.
I love seeing that. Tell me, what were you going to say?
That's the problem I have with nutrition as a whole. When I done my 2-year nutrition course through the BTN Academy, and I was basically taught that your plate should be based around carbohydrates. And I think that's the big problem that people are kind of getting confused about, because that's been pushed in the mainstream at the moment.
Yep.
Yeah, and even building on that, I think the biggest, I've been watching so many different podcasts, reading a bunch of scientific literature and other studies that are epidemiological and stuff like that on that they used over the last basically 80 years now, probably. Most of the 19th century, such as all the studies that Ansel Keys did that basically demonizing saturated fat, talking about LDL and cholesterol and all of these things to push other agendas. And those are the things that, if you look at the rate of disease and chronic disease like diabetes, cancer, all of these things, heart disease, have really just gone like this. And we've taken into account most of the dietary guidelines that the government, US government, et cetera, have put in place as the healthy guidelines. We eat less red meat, we eat more poultry, our vegetable oil use is like boom, and it's not led to better health. And now we do take into account other lifestyle things, exercise, blah, blah, blah. But that's a major, and actually, if you look at it, since 98, I believe, I was looking at some graphs the other day, we actually do exercise more over the last 20 years, and yet our rates of disease still go up. So you got to look at that and be like, well, something doesn't add up. And so I think, Tommy, I don't know if you had anything to ask based on that, or...
Yeah, what I was going to touch upon when you obviously talked about heart disease there, I think especially especially in the vegan community, you're beginning to see them moving more and more away from the health aspect. Especially, you're even getting a lot of the MDs actually coming out and talking about Gaff Davis, for example. He came out recently and he was even contesting against whether like red meat causes any heart disease, and he actually said that he recommended his own patients eat fish for omega-3s. Yet the vegans are still pushing this message that these things are bad. So I think it's really important that we get the real message out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me give you the real message on it. All the epidemiological data is what's called associative.
Mm-hmm.
It correlates one thing with another thing. It does not establish causality. I'll give you an example. There is a very strong, very powerful, very statistically significant correlation between the sale of ice creams at the beach and shark attacks.
Yeah.
With that in mind, here's how we prevent shark attacks. What we need to do is litigate against the sale of ice cream. Now, obviously, that's ridiculous, isn't it, boys, to say that?
Exactly.
But that is exactly what we're doing with saturated fat. And that said, the actual correlation between saturated fat and heart disease is, to all intents and purposes, to any given human being over a 100-year lifespan, it's nothing. It is a statistically significant number because of the sample size, but the actual magnitude of difference between people in the lowest quartile of fat consumption and people in the highest quartile of saturated fat consumption for heart disease, for cancer, for longevity, in other words, mortality for any reason, including accidents and illness and whatever else, there is no association. The guidelines are based on a lie. The lie is this: you take the absolute outcome statistic of your epidemiological data and you transfer that absolute outcome statistic into a relative outcome statistic. Here's how you do it. Let's say I have two populations of people. Both populations of people have a sample size of 1 million individuals. Okay? On the left are 1 million people who eat no saturated fat whatsoever. And on the right are another 1 million people who are matched pairs for the first 1 million people in terms of everything else. And they eat tons and tons of saturated fat. Okay? Let's say on the left, the people who had no intake of saturated fat whatsoever, let's say one of those people died out of those 1 million people. And on the right, the people who ate saturated fat, let's say 2 of those people died in the follow-up period, in the research period. So if you're being a reasonable scientist, you say on the left we have an incidence of death of 1 in 1 million. On the right we have an incidence of death of 2 in 1 million. So the difference between that is 1 in 1 million, isn't it? That's what the difference is. Do you get the math there? Just say, yes, we got it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got it.
Oh, good. Right. Okay, good. All right. However, here's what the epidemiologists do instead. They say there was a 100% increase in mortality.
Yep.
Which is true, but it's completely misleading, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Completely misleading. So the difference between people who eat no saturated fat and people who eat a lot is nothing. That's what the epidemiology says.
Well, and a lot of the issue too is a lot of these people that are running these studies already have a certain bias based on their like background or whatever. Because I can't remember the name of the study, but I know Ansel Keys was on a study back in the day, and they found the exact opposite of what his original hypothesis was about LDL and saturated fat. So he didn't like that, so they didn't release the study for 16 years. I really should have just remembered the name of the study. It sounds like I'm mentioning nothing. And he didn't also put his name on the study despite the fact that he worked on it. He didn't want to be associated with it because it didn't prove his hypothesis to be true. And we keep seeing that kind of time and time again. But we don't see anybody really wanting to take any mainstream clinical, whatever, like a standard a standard long-term test of that to prove it. I don't think we'll see one necessarily.
But it's absolutely impossible, Ryan, and I'll tell you why. Number one, if you want to prove something scientifically, you have to do an interventional research project. You have to do an experiment.
Yep.
Okay? You can't do associative stuff because that doesn't prove causality. We've covered that. So what you have to do is you have to take two populations of people who are genetically identical twins, split them up at birth, put them in a locked laboratory and keep them there for their entire lives and change nothing except what they eat. So it's not ethical. It's not feasible, and you can't pay for it. Exactly, Tommy. So it's never going to happen. So therefore, you've got a whole bunch of people who are ideologically driven, who are running around, throwing out these associative things as if they're some kind of fact, and in fact, lying about them with malice aforethought to suit their ideology. Example, how many times have you boys heard this one? The whole food plant-based diet is the only diet shown to be associated with the regression of atherosclerotic heart disease.
Every time I go on my news nutrition app, every single time.
Right.
The Seventh-day Adventist study, that's another one that they troll out constantly. Ethical vegans, and most of them were vegetarian.
Yeah. So you look at, there are two studies that underpin that statement about the whole food plant-based diet and heart disease. One of them is by Esselstyn, and the other one is by that other guy whose name's just gone out of my head at the moment, but it'll come back to me at some point. Ornish. That's him.
There you go.
Okay. The Ornish study has a sample size so small as that the study is meaningless. The follow-up period was too short, and there was 3 or 4 different interventions that were put in play on top of diet, including counseling, statin medication, and cessation of smoking. So that invalidates that study, even as an associative study. The Esselstyn study, the diets those people ate contained a large amount of dairy products and eggs. Neither of those things are vegan, boys, are they?
No.
Unless you're from Venus, in which case you can make your own rules, apparently. Sorry, John. Eggs are not vegan. And also, sorry, John, the vegan diet is not a good idea, son, at all.
I'm actually embarrassed to bring this up, but I actually bought into this when I was vegan.
Oh, if you don't eat your vegetables, you might die.
And believe me, it's so funny because at the beginning of when we started doing this podcast, Tommy, like a few months ago, I would look at carnivore and I couldn't understand it because we even talked about like, damn, like I would say that stuff's crazy. And the more and some people will just say like, oh, you went down the rabbit hole or whatever. But the dots just connect that in other circles do not connect at all. And when you really think about it logically and from a historical perspective of humanity, which is hard because over the last 100 years, 60 years, things have changed so much. Technology, food processing, all of these things, where our new normal isn't really in the scheme of human existence normal at all. It's very opposite. It's very abnormal, as you would say in Young Frankenstein. But it's so I think one thing Tommy wanted to definitely discuss was the Randle cycle. So what exactly did you want to?
Yeah, obviously I had never really heard of this in nutrition at all, and I think it was you that originally brought my even to the kind of mainstream when I was actually vegan myself. I was watching you for a long while. It kind of made me obviously question a lot of things, and I just thought it'd be good to bring it up to actually let people know about it, and you can kind of go into it.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Okay, so the Randle cycle is a part of our holistic overall metabolic pathways. It's a series of switches, if you like, where in various different enzymes that allow or disallow various reactions of metabolites in our system, it turns these switches on and off. The overall effect of the Randle cycle when it is activated is that it actually turns off 2 switches It turns off your ability to metabolize both fat and carbohydrate. Thus, you necessarily absolutely become inflamed acutely, and acute inflammation actually is the switch that causes people to start to gain body fat, to put fat on their bodies. If you continue to keep the Randle cycle activated all the time, then your acute inflammation as a function of that becomes chronic, and thereby you become a chronic fat storage machine, and you will become obese over time, and it will metabolically destroy you, basically. Here's how to activate the Randle cycle. Consume a diet which is rich in both carbohydrate and fat. Simple. There you go. If you consume a diet rich in both of those things, you will be able to metabolize neither. So you will be getting fatter and fatter while all the time actually slowly starving to death. We are designed metabolically to run on a diet, ideally, which is rich in whole protein, animal protein, and associated fat, which is largely saturated. Okay. We have the ability to subsist, to survive periods of there not being the availability of animals to hunt or meat and fat to eat. It's one of the reasons we've been so successful as a species and that we haven't gone extinct where many others have. That and the fact that we've hunted many of the other animals to extinction because we're smarter than they are. We think we're smarter than they are anyway. Yeah. Okay. So fat and protein together, no problem. It'll all run through your system. Everyone will be happy. There's no problem. A bunch of carbohydrate without fat so much won't activate the Randle cycle either. You won't get obese on that. Okay? But as soon as you mix the two together, in other words, as soon as you follow a balanced diet, exactly what the FDA and ADA and all these people tell us you should do, and the World Health Organization, don't even get me started on that organization. All the things that these so-called authorities tell you should do, balance is a good thing, they say. Balance is absolutely the worst thing you can do metabolically for that reason. As soon as you mix fat and carbohydrate together in your diet at any significant level, you are in trouble at some point. Let me back that up too with some anecdotes. No actual evidence, just anecdotes, mind. Here they are. Look at public health statistics for the last 80 years. Have we got slimmer?
No.
No. Is that because we're not exercising as much? We've already covered that today. No, that's not the reason. Interesting. Okay, so following public health advice has led us to become obese, insulin resistant, diabetic, fat, sick, etc. Good. So let's change the advice, shall we, by actually looking at our metabolic systems, including the Randle cycle, which tells us don't eat fat and carbohydrate. Eat a diet which is either rich in protein and fat, or a diet which is rich in carbohydrates and poor in fat and protein. So either of those will alleviate the Randle cycle issue. You will lose weight from the standard diet. You will feel better for the first 3 or 4 years if you choose, for example, a whole food plant-based diet, because you are alleviating the Randle cycle. Oh, yes, I felt great straight away when I went vegan, and congratulations, it'll last about 3 to 5 years. And then the nutritional deficiencies will start to kick in because you are designed to run on whole animal protein and saturated fat. You are not designed to run on carbohydrate and polyunsaturated fat in very small amounts with very poor protein. That's why vegans melt away, because they are nutritionally deficient, demonstrably. So after 3 to 5 years, now your health's destroyed, and now you have to start from worse than you even were when you were on the standard diet, probably. So your choice is really obvious. Why not follow your genetic gift? Why not follow how we have eaten as a species for 350,000 years, as evidenced by the nitrogen-15 isotope testing, and just eat a species-appropriate diet, which, by the way, kills far fewer animals.
Yep. I do want to bring up. Oh no, go.
Sorry, Ryan.
Go,
Sorry,
Tom.
Ryan.
No, you go.
I was going to say there, I actually wonder why, maybe that's the reason why the high carb, low fat vegans actually, even though they look a lot iller, they do last longer than your regular whole food plant-based dieter.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You absolutely need fat as an energy source. And the source of energy that you are designed to run off is largely saturated animal fat. Yeah. So to starve your body of your primary preferred fuel source, it should be no surprise that it is going to lead you to a nutritional deficiency sooner or later.
Yeah, and I was great for probably right around about 2 years, and then the health issues started kicking in that much that it impacted my eating disorder recovery. People actually said things like I was eating too little and nonsense like that, even though I was posting all the meals that I was eating. They were saying, "Oh, but you must have been throwing them in the bin," and things like that. Then things like the migraines kicked in, the gut issues, the pain below my left rib, as if somebody had stabbed me in the ribs. Mm-hmm. Absolute constant passing blood through my stools, everything like that. And then when I added in things like eggs and fish, the health issues just. Where's the magic nutrient in this fish and eggs nonsense?
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to build off of what Tommy was just talking about. And I think it's important to get into now, because I've been in like some carnivore Facebook groups, and I do believe there is a right way to do carnivore and clearly a wrong way to do carnivore.
Oh shit, here we go.
And yeah. Well, I see. You have to do what's within your means. Not everybody has the same means. Like, I'm fortunate; I can afford, for instance, to get grass-fed, grass-finished meat, whenever. Not everybody's like that. I would say a lot of people are not like that at all. So you have to do like what is within your means.
Yeah.
But vegans, for instance, will go back at you on the carnivore and be like, well, what about vitamin C? What about your LDL? What about your cholesterol? So let's probably just squash those right now, Bart.
Okay, you bet. Okay. So first of all, we here in the carnivore community, well, those of us who are sensible, so that doesn't include you anymore, Frank. I'm sorry about that. We don't have this whole "you did it wrong" thing that vegans seem to lean upon. Oh well, you never really were a carnivore. You did it wrong. That's what your problem was. And I'll tell you why we actually don't have that. It's because we don't have too many people turning around and saying the carnivore diet wasn't for me. It didn't work for me. Nobody.
That's true. That is true. That is very true. Yeah.
Nobody at all. It works for everybody. I'll tell you why. Because we're all the same species, and because we all have the same genetic gift. We all have the same organ systems, and that is one that is designed to run on the flesh and fat of animals. So that's why it works so well. That's why people's health improves vastly, unbelievably, when they actually start eating a species-appropriate diet. In other words, get rid of the jolly plants out of your diet. They're not indicated. They're not good for you, and neither is balance. They're full of toxins and poisons. They're pro-inflammatory. They destroy your gut function, which destroys your health overall. Not indicated at all. The whole grass-fed, grain-fed argument, my take on it is very simple. If you can get grass-fed and you can afford grass-fed, that is preferable, absolutely. No two ways about it. If you cannot get grass-fed or you cannot afford grass-fed and grain-fed is your only option, that is still vastly, and I mean vastly, preferable to eating a diet based on plants.
Totally.
Absolutely, without question. So we can leave that one right there. And I'm not going to ever ask for your carnivore card back, publicly name and shame you, point at you and laugh at you and say you did it wrong if you eat grain-fed beef.
Oh, no. Okay. I definitely wouldn't do that.
I'll do that for you.
All right, great, Tommy. Thanks. Right, so let's deal with vitamin C as our next one. Right. This one's really interesting, actually. and follow this rabbit hole and follow this line of logic. You know how I said before on teeth, we still have herbivorous teeth to some degree. They have changed a bit, but not as much as you would expect. We don't have teeth like a carnivore because there is no selection pressure which mandates us to have teeth like that. We have knives and forks, and we build tools and spears and things. We don't need carnivorous teeth and claws. So why would we have those? So the only time anything is going to disappear from our physiology completely is if there is an actual negative effect of that thing, if it is litigated against, if it is knocked out of our gene pool because it's not a good thing. Here we go. Around about, don't quote me on this, I might get the number wrong, but I think it's about no more recently than about 3 million years ago. It might have even been as long as 6.5 million years ago. The ancestor of humans at that time had an event of some kind, whatever it was, that led to a complete 100% annihilation of the gene in their systems that would allow them to metabolize and make their own vitamin C. Most animals can generate their own vitamin C. They can make it from non-vitamin C precursors like sugar. Human beings cannot do that. There is not one living human being that has any remnant of that gene remaining.
Yeah.
That tells us something. It tells us that that gene was aggressively litigated against by natural selection. That's where the science stops and my hypothesizing begins. Let's say around about that time, Earth suddenly experienced a quite sudden climate change and became glaciated. An ice age occurred.
Imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that happening. Humans at that time probably went, you know what? There are no plants left. They're all dead. Frozen, can't get to them. Tell you what, though. These animals look tasty. And we've got no other option because it's either that or we're going to actually be eliminated as a species. Perhaps we should start eating some meat. Nom, 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 nom. So over that period of time, what happens is the human system starts developing and getting used to a higher level of a substance in the blood called uric acid. You've probably heard of this one. It's the one that they say claim causes gout.
Gout, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Uric acid is actually a very, very powerful water-based antioxidant, much along the same lines as vitamin C. Only it's much more effective than vitamin C, in fact, and doesn't have some of the problems that vitamin C does have attendant with it. Especially when you mix uric acid with vitamin C, then you get gout. Show me a carnivore that's got gout. They don't exist because they are not eating carbohydrates. So next, let's look at how does vitamin C get out of your blood and into the cells where it needs to do its thing. It needs a transporter that gets it there. Does anybody, do either of you boys know what that transporter is for vitamin C?
I actually don't know.
I know it, but I can't think of the name.
It's called GLUT4.
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 Mm-hmm.
Now, that should sound familiar to you, shouldn't it? Because GLUT4 is the same transporter that transports glucose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're eating a bunch of carbohydrates, that will competitively outcompete the entry into cells for vitamin C. So you're going to need a whole bunch more vitamin C. Luckily, no luck involved, because that's the way that it has evolved itself. Fruit contains naturally a bit of vitamin C, quite a bit of vitamin C. So the animals that eat a bunch of fruit can still get a bunch of vitamin C that way. And animals that eat a bunch of fruit generally don't eat much meat, so they don't have much uric acid, no issues. Again, it's mix the two together, make a mixed metaphor, have a balanced diet. Whoops, now we've got gout and all sorts of other problems, including this. People will tell you that if you eat too much vitamin C, it's no problem because you'll just wee it out. What with it being water soluble, which is true to an extent. You'll get most of it out that way, but there's still a remnant amount that remains in your body over and above what you need, which, by the way, if you don't eat much carbohydrates, you need a microgram range of vitamin C because it's not being outcompeted. Anyway, so extra vitamin C in your blood will be urinated out to the most part, but that little amount that is left needs to be metabolized. Anybody know what it's metabolized to? Oxalate.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That's something
Oxalate.
we've talked a lot about on here, that oxalates.
Yeah, we have talked a lot about oxalates.
So you eat a bunch of vitamin C, like you take gram doses of vitamin C every day because you're told it's good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Most of that will be weed out. What isn't weed out will be metabolized to oxalate. Good work. You don't need vitamin C. You don't need extra vitamin C. You don't need to chase vitamin C. Does anybody know how many cases or how many verified cases of scurvy have ever been presented to the medical profession anywhere in the world?
It's very low.
People who are carnivores. How many?
Oh,
Can it
carnivores?
be?
I don't think. How many?
Can it be many?
I haven't heard any. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
There are no carnivores carnivore humans that have ever presented with scurvy.
There was something interesting. There was something interesting about the whole thing. They were talking about. I can't remember. I believe it was Dr. Walls, and I can't remember who she was discussing this with. But they were talking about the Arctic expeditions way back in the day, where in the first successful one, the person that ended up making it actually, in order to survive, ditched the European rations of food and ended up eating like the Inuit, and it worked so well. Which, by the way, the Inuit mostly saturated fat meat, pretty much. That's pretty much it, from what I understand. It worked so well that he continued that the rest of his life. I don't believe there are any issues that came about that.
Yeah, that comes directly from a book called The Fat of the Land.
That's right.
The chapter that you are talking about is a chapter concerning vitamin C directly, which you will find read by yours truly, this bald bad man, as an audio book thing on my fine YouTube channel. So go and check that out. There you go.
I listen to that. You have a perfect voice for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It took me about 3 or 4 takes because I kept messing it up, and I was like, "Ah!"
Oh, I know how that goes. I know how that goes.
Oh dear. Anyway, so that's another story. Okay, so that's vitamin C. It's nonsense. You don't need it. You don't need to chase it. Megadosing on vitamin C is a very, very bad idea. There are no health issues around not consuming a great deal of vitamin C.
No.
Fantastic.
What's cool about that too, mentioning that is we can even mention what I've noticed, at least heard from other people, is that when you do get into the carnivore diet, your body allocates nutrients very differently. So there, for instance, people that have eaten, I believe it was who was it? Michaela Peterson, who was mentioning that like she was doing basically a lion diet, which is just steak, pretty much just like steak. For over a year, and when she got her blood work re-upped, she actually had no deficiencies at all. So your body is allocating, so your body is allocating these minerals differently than it would be on, say, a Western style diet as well.
It's almost as if a diet based entirely on the flesh and associated fat of animals is good for people.
It seems weird.
I know.
I can say anecdotally regards my wife. My wife suffered ovarian cancer in the past. She was actually put on a carnivore diet by her oncologist. Wow. Since that time, that actually reversed her cancer problems. She's obviously been clear of cancer for a good few years. Recently, she got put back on like carbohydrates from her cancer nurse. That's when the issues have actually started to come back. She suffered, obviously, type 2 diabetes and things like that. So kind of the proof's in the pudding, as the saying goes.
Yeah.
My opinion on that, Tommy, is that these people that are still promoting this poisonous ideology, this nonsensical pseudoscientific garbage that is demonstrably, clearly wrong, dangerous misinformation for people, I think all these people should be struck off, at least.
Absolutely.
And once they're struck off, they should go to prison.
Absolutely, because it actually brought back, she obviously had ovarian cancer, then she recovered, she got put back onto the carbohydrates and things like that, then she ended up suffering bladder cancer. Since then, she's just had like one issue after another, and it's trying to get through to them. Like, we've mentioned, obviously, try to kind of come off carbohydrates. They keep saying that she's going to be devoid of nutrients and things like that, and you're dealing with people that are supposedly authority figures, but...
Yeah.
Yeah,
they are walking Dunning-Kruger factories. For those that don't know what that reference means, Dunning-Kruger is an effect whereby someone who is vastly incompetent to speak on a given topic does so anyway, and does so with some sort of claimed authority. They are an unconscious incompetent. They genuinely believe themselves to be knowledgeable in the area, but in fact they are what I refer to as an asshat.
I like that word. That's one of my favorite.
Cockwomble.
But
cockwomble.
I hate to really like dawdle on some of these things, because I feel like once you get in, you realize just how asinine some of your worries are about carnivore. But I do think we should kind of also squash the LDL cholesterol thing, because even I've noticed as I've lowered my carbs, my LDL actually has gone up.
Yeah.
So
I'm the same.
I'll let you take that one away.
All right. Brilliant. Okay. Number one, there is no such thing as good and bad cholesterol. Look up cholesterol in any biochemistry textbook you like. There is only one molecule called cholesterol. The diagram is always the same. So what do you mean good and bad cholesterol? Nonsense. Well, as it turns out, good and bad cholesterol actually does not refer to cholesterol at all. It refers to various classes of what's called phospholipoproteins. And what do phospholipoproteins do? They carry cholesterol. They are a way of solvating cholesterol in blood. Cholesterol is fat soluble, blood is water-based, cholesterol will not dissolve in the blood. So it needs a phospholipid membrane, like an exosome, like a package, if you like, to carry it around in your blood. There are different classes of phospholipoproteins. They're usually just called lipoproteins, and even more parsimoniously, they are referred to as classes of cholesterol, which is ridiculous because the cholesterol that's contained in one form of lipoprotein is exactly the same as contained in another. When you say, I had my cholesterol tested, no, you didn't. You had your lipoprotein levels tested. Goodness me. It's just, nonsense that the misinformation that is perpetuated by the medical profession on the great unwashed public, I guess. Anywho, let's go to logic again. Let's follow this rabbit hole here. The phospholipoproteins exist, all of them, because there is a length of DNA in your DNA structure that encodes for the production of that phospholipoprotein. That length of DNA that encodes for the production of that protein has survived 3,800 million years of natural selection. It must be useful. It's there. Goodness. Why? Well, because cholesterol, when it's being transported around the body in the blood, needs to be delivered to certain tissues selectively in certain amounts. Selectively. There's a plan, obviously. The different proteins lock onto different sorts of cells, thus delivering their payload to the place it needs to be. Example, low-density lipoprotein, or LDL, the bad cholesterol, is not bad at all. Its role is to deliver cholesterol to the cells that line your vasculature, your blood vessels, so that those cells can absorb that cholesterol and use it for their own ends. What sort of ends would that be? Well, in your body, you have somewhere between 3 to 3.5 trillion, with a T, trillion cells. 50% of the weight of every single one of the cell membranes around every single one of those cells in your body is molecular cholesterol, without which you will die, because you will not be able to maintain cell membrane integrity. Your cells will explode. That's not a good thing.
No.
Okay. Next, almost every metabolic enzyme in your body that catalyzes almost every reaction that occurs in your body, the things that keep you alive, almost every one of those enzymes is activated or deactivated by binding with vitamin D3. Vitamin D3 is derived directly from molecular cholesterol. Oh, okay. Your secondary sex hormones, either testosterone or estrogen, depending on your gender, both of those are directly manufactured from cholesterol. The myelin sheaths over the cells that transmit nerve impulses throughout your body. Myelin is made from, guess what, boys? Cholesterol. I could go on all day. Cholesterol exists in your body for a reason. It is not bad. Without it, you will die. If you keep your cholesterol level artificially low, you will suffer health consequences as a result of that. The role of LDL is to deliver that cholesterol where it needs to go. The role of HDL is to pick up the remnant LDLs once the payload has been delivered and take that back to the liver for reprocessing. That's why they say HDL is good cholesterol, because it lowers your LDL cholesterol, which is bad. No, they just have different jobs to do. They're both useful. All the genes in your body are like a light switch. They turn on and they turn off based on what's happening. So if you have a high level of LDL in your body, it's because your body is transcribing that protein because it is supposed to. Why might you need a high level of LDL being delivered to your cells when you first go carnivore, for example? Maybe it's because your body is suddenly saying, now he's not assaulting me anymore with this plant-based slop, this poisonous garbage that's killing me. Finally, I can do some actual healing of my vastly inflamed vascular tree. Maybe we should deliver some cholesterol in order to make that happen. We better transcribe some more LDL to get it there.
Yeah.
That's why your LDL goes up.
That makes sense. I'm actually kind of curious because there's this idea around survival foods. Like there may have been some plants that humans use. So what are your thoughts on some plants at certain times?
Yeah,
maybe per season. Yeah.
Okay, so wherever you come from in the world, even equatorially, fruits naturally were available seasonally and for a short part of the season. And it was at the end of autumn, just before it's going to start getting chillier, to whatever degree it's going to get chillier, depending on the latitude that you live. Fruits are full of sugars, carbohydrates. What happens when you mix carbohydrates and fats in your diet because you're eating an animal-based diet? Whoops, there's some fruit available. The randle cycle. So you're going to put some fat on, which is quite useful going into a cold winter. Hello.
Yep.
That's what the randle cycle is.
I was just in this discussion with my dad the other day, where it's so funny that not evolutionarily, but how we've kind of flipped the seasons in which we tend to gain weight. Everyone gains weight in the winter because of the holidays, but everyone tries to lose weight for the summer. So it actually goes against what our biology and history was meant for. It's really, I just find it fascinating.
Yeah.
That's what Ryan, Ryan's kind of genetics are probably a lot like mine, because your family's actually from the UK. So
yeah,
so it's
Northwestern European, actually, apparently. But I think at some level, when you look at all humans genetically are pretty similar. So I feel like you can broadly go across and have some changes here and there diet wise, but overall we're pretty much built the same. I mean, we're not that much different than people born in like South America or Asia, really.
We're the same species, we have the same genetic gift.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that I want to actually discuss, we've had a lot of dietitians and things like that on here, and we've spoken about oxalates, phytates, anti-nutrients, and they've basically all just said that they're not a problem for people as long as you cook your food, that minimises the effect of them. I wanted to kind of hear your opinion on that, Bart, and what kind of the truth really is.
Yeah,
the truth is that's bollocks. Basically, you are designed to run on the whole protein of animals and the associated fat that comes along with it. Reducing the level of poison doesn't make it less of a poison. It just reduces the level of it and slows down the effect over a lifetime of it. You can talk about the hormetic effect if you like and say some level of poisoning yourself is indicated. Well, sure, maybe it is, but I'll tell you what, even if you eat a perfect carnivore diet in today's world, in today's society, you're going to be getting some hormesis. You're going to be getting some poison. You can't get away from it because of the way humans have done to our planet, basically. So I don't think there's any need to add any extra. There are no nutrients in plants that you cannot derive from an entirely plant-based diet in sufficient quantity for human beings. None. That is not true of a plant-based diet. You cannot derive everything you need from a plant-based diet. Fact. I don't even know why this discussion still goes on. I really don't.
I think the biggest problem, obviously, is the vegans are obviously coming out with that eating a plant-based diet is the most ethical for the animals. Really, what's your opinion on that?
That's also bollocks. If again, you just apply some basic common logic here. Right, here we go. As a carnivore, in effect, I am responsible for the death of one animal because one cattle beast would feed me for a year. Now, obviously, the meat I eat over a year comes from different animals and different, but spread that out across all the people that eat any of the meat, work it out as number of deaths attributable. Well, it's one. If I ate nothing but beef, for example. Right. Now, let's say I fill my plate up with various different sorts of plant-based slop from around the world. Number one, the air miles on all of that food, because I'll tell you what, you show me a plant-based plate that comes from, all of it comes from the same place.
Yeah.
And I'll eat my hat. All of it's coming from all around the world and huge amounts of air miles on that. Okay, number two, they're all grown in monocrops. Monocrops are associated with pesticides. So how many animals killed there? The fact that you're not directly eating the animals doesn't make them any less dead. Pesticides, okay? The biological diversity of changing a piece of land from its natural multiple species, multiple plant species, multiple animal species state into a monocrop state vastly decimates animal numbers hugely. Millions of animals are going to die per acre. The fact of the matter is, when you're making this ethical dilemma up in your brain here, you need to count all animals as animals, even the ones that crawl around on the ground, even the ones that aren't cute and furry and look up at you lovingly with big brown eyes. The insects, the worms, the moths, the caterpillars, the rodents that are hacked up in combine harvesters every year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not to mention the pesticides, the runoff into the ocean, the death of the, all that kind of stuff associated directly with agriculture.
Yeah.
Also, I'll tell you, who is the largest user of fossil fuels in the world? It's big agriculture.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Forget about it. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely, it's as soon as you apply basic logic, here's what I like to say, boys. I like to say facts and logic destroy vegan nonsense every time. Because that's how it is.
Yeah.
The whole vegan ideology is just that. It's an ideology. It's a religious zealotry. it is put together by a bunch of people who are vastly either misled or indeed vastly evil with knowledge of forethought. I believe a lot of them are the latter, evil doers. I think they are people who need to be stopped. And that's why I do what I do, to point to the actual facts and the actual logic. There's absolutely, it's orders of magnitude difference. There's absolutely no way you can say that a carnivore diet kills more animals than a vegan diet. The exact opposite is absolutely, demonstrably, unarguably true.
Yeah.
What gets me most about anything is they expect you to basically die for veganism. Like, you were never really vegan, but they can never decompartmentalize the fact that you've got to kind of balance your ethics with your health, because once your health goes out the window, you're just supposed to reject that.
Well, that's because of we're so lucky as humans to be in a position where we have the ability to think about these ethical dilemmas and like burden ourselves with these thoughts. Whereas, I mean, at the end of the day, we're just animals. We're just animals too. So, but because we put ourselves on that pedestal where we lift ourselves up unnecessarily, I think, in a lot of ways. And when really, because like you said, it's all logic. It's really it's really pretty simple. But we've added this complexity that's not needed. And we've fucked a lot of things up, pardon my language, by doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's when they start saying they love animals, yet they'll put their dogs and the cats in a vegan diet. It's like, is that no animal abuse?
Yeah.
That's madness to me. I've seen that.
Or even worse, Tommy, even worse, they'll put their child on a vegan diet. How dare you? How dare you? To use the Greta thing. How dare you? Goodness.
No. I mean, we could honestly, I could do this. I could talk about this stuff probably for another like 5 hours, because we
should actually do a follow-up.
That's what I was going to say. I want to do a whole follow-up with you sometime, Bart, in the next few weeks, and talk about stem cells and that other aspect of research that you're into, because that's
this will be up in my channel as well, I might add.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Yeah. So tell us before we go here after episode 1, where they can find you, follow you, all that good stuff.
Right. So there's a good place to start. There. You can find me there. There's the other place you can find me. Basically, that's my primary YouTube channel. I've got several YouTube channels. That's the primary one. If none of that works, if you just do a search on that one, just put that into Google, you cannot not find me. The first 10 pages that come up are me.
You are a lucky man. You are a lucky man.
I've done the SEO. I've done the SEO.
Is it good or bad though?
Well, it's
Michelle Lowe come up about 50 times on that probably with our videos.
Probably, yeah. It should be saying, well, that's just anecdotes. Do you have any actual evidence, Bart? You're wrong again, Bart. Do you have evidence, Bart? Have you, Bart?
In the entire carnivore community, that seems to be their biggest attack on it, is just anecdotal evidence, because simply because nobody's ever going to fund the actual trial research that it's going to take to actually do any of this. Like, no one's going to do it. Like,
and even if they were, you can't get it through ethics.
Yeah, exactly. So it's such a farce. I can't stand it.
Yep. I've said repeatedly, Ryan, there is no such thing as nutrition science.
Yeah.
It's a complete it's a misnomer. You're being lied to.
Yeah.
Nutrition science doesn't exist.
I think you've said it often, Bart, that we know more about Mars than we do about the gut microbiome.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep, that's true. Yep.
But anyway, I want to thank you again, Bart, for taking us down this rabbit hole. We're really just putting the tip in, because this is not even getting into most of this stuff. But hopefully it's a good starting point for a lot of the viewers out there who want to know more about this stuff, or are conversely not for this stuff at all. Hopefully it maybe got you thinking a little bit. So again, Tommy, thank you for being here as always. Thank you for driving us.
Appreciate it.
Bart, thank you again. And we will see you guys in the next one.
Awesome.
Peace out.
See ya.